Hello and welcome to the Joe's Art History Podcast, a podcast which celebrates all things art historical every single day. Welcome back. It's episode, 24. We're nearly 25. We're fairly getting through them. This week on the Joe's Art History Podcast, I sit down with Leeds-based visual artist and art world professional Lauren Harrison to discuss the idea of art as a full immersive experience. Well, first of all, what do we mean by saying a full immersive experience? Insert air quotes here, as this is not a phrase that's genuinely associated with art and indeed the art world. Well, it should be, in my opinion, and my talk with Lauren will definitely sway your decision in the correct direction. And there are plenty of artists out there creating incredible works, which sole success lie in audience interaction and participation. Lauren talks us through 3 such examples of art as a full immersive experience, and we debate the pros and cons of the art world fully embracing the digital age. Now, I don't know if you've been living under a rock for the past year, but in case you haven't heard, 2020 had this thing called COVID-19 happen to it, where the majority of the world broke and shut down. And in the UK, where I am based, the art world has really suffered. Our institutions haven't been able to open, and even though, for example, on the 12th of April, my gallery can open because it's a commercial space, larger institutions such as the British Museum, the V&A, Tate, they can't open until May. So it's really, really important that we have these conversations of how these institutions can perhaps embrace the digital and how it can actually be not only just a lifeline, but a way of encouraging people to get out and interact with art, because art should be fun, it should be enjoyable. And this is a really great chat where Lauren really sort of bangs the drum for making art fun, because it's not really a word that you associate with art, and it should be, because art's hilarious. I mean, art is a lot of things, but fun isn't one of the words that comes to mind. This is an incredible chat which will really get you thinking, so sit back and relax as Lauren and I discuss art as a virtual experience. So we're going to be talking about the idea of art as a full immersive experience, and I kind of just have to ask, really, what got you interested in this topic?
I guess I've always kind of been interested in art being quite consuming. I studied art at uni and I really enjoyed getting stuck into it academically, but there's something about an immersive art experience. It doesn't matter whether you have gone to uni or whether you've just thought, oh, that looks nice. I think it's just a universal feeling and everyone's kind of on the same page. It can mean different things to different people, but they're having a shared experience, which I really, really love. So I also take part in live visuals, it's where it's all kind of come from, I think. The idea of a shared experience where everyone's in a room at one time and they're all experiencing the same thing as the next person, but it's all kind of meditative and meaning something different to that person at that point in their life. And I just think it's perfect that they can walk away from that and have had a memory and something that they can say that they did. And I think art as an immersive experience, it appeals to everyone. I think is probably the main thing.
Completely agree with you. What I love about this is just exactly reiterating what you said, that you don't have to have an art history degree or know anything about it, and it will sort of sit with you in some way. But what I really love about this topic and how your first example of the works you have given me, when you think of a full immersive experience, you perhaps think it's this huge big hall or gallery space and there's lights and sounds everywhere and it's completely 360 all over you. But your first example that you've given me completely rewrites the rule book. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the first artist and this work?
Yeah, for sure. So it's Pipilotti wrist. If If you haven't heard of her, she's well worth looking up. She's quite balmy, and that's one reason why I love her. But
Yeah.
the piece is called Selfless in the Bath of Lava. And it's from all the way back in 1994, where technology wasn't as good as it is now. And she simply created a video of herself um, kind of looking up at the camera, uh, cursing it basically in a pool of what looks like lava and fire, and it's installed just in the floor. So you have to physically get down on your hands and knees to experience this video, and you could miss it as well. A lot of people, when I saw this piece, when I went to see her exhibition, Eyeball Massage, in London, a lot of people just didn't really recognize it. They just thought, oh, it's something in the floor. They didn't see it as part of the exhibition. So every now and then people will be down on their hands and knees getting into this piece to kind of like check it out. And obviously that's what was great about the piece as well. The audience doing that physicality and getting on their hands and knees to watch it created the piece, because the idea was that you, the viewer, were God looking down on this individual that's been shown in the video in the floor. And the fact that the audience is forced into moving their body in a certain way by the artist without them actually being there, I think is amazing. Like, it is immersive, because otherwise you'd miss it.
Well, that's it. And I think, like you said, I love the idea that it literally is like a tiny crack in the floor, like you would if you were walking over perhaps like an old hardwood floor, and there's a little gap. And there's some brilliant images of like, for size reference, of like people standing next to it with their Converse on.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a blink and you'd miss it, or not, because it's not even roped off in any sort of way to like protect it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just you could essentially walk right over it. And I love this idea of kind of you as the viewer playing God, but also having to really almost get down on your hands and knees. I think when an artwork makes you interact in a space differently, I mean, how often do you get on your hands and knees outside your house or when you drop something, do you know?
Yeah.
It's not a typical behavior. And I think in how she makes the viewer interact differently
Mhm.
and move differently for a piece, it's a way of really making that artwork stick with you.
Completely. If you ever get a chance to see any of our exhibitions, I would 100% recommend it in terms of immersion. But the way that she uses the screen, or lack thereof, is fantastic. There's some pieces I remember that were inside handbags for some reason. Uh,
No.
so you just had to like stick your head in a handbag and then you'd see it, or just in really unusual places, maneuvering the audience in a way that you wouldn't really anticipate going into a white cube area. And I just think she just turns
Mm.
this whole idea of how you see art on its head. And I think for me, it was a massive eye opener as to how art can be viewed and how it can exist in a space. It doesn't have to be contained, in
Mm.
a screen. It doesn't have to be contained in a frame. It can be anything, anywhere. Like, the possibilities are endless. And I'm sure anyone that walked into that exhibition not knowing what to expect would probably come away with it the same expectations or the same thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. What strikes me is I've had this conversation like continuously with people with the whole idea of there's a lot of people that find entering a gallery space very intimidating, and the idea that you're not really told how to look at art, but you're expected to, the traditional way of viewing it is it's on
Mhm.
walls or it's on a plinth. But what I really love is this kind of gives you an even playing field, because there's no sort of this is how, air quotes here, you should be, you should move through the room in this direction, and you'll view the paintings one, two,
Mhm.
three. Here it kind of, regardless of where you're coming from, background, understanding, you don't know what to expect. Like you said, oh, okay, so we're going to go stick our head in handbags and we're going to look on the floor now, and then we're going to look in this room and it's going to be completely
Uh-huh.
360. I think it's a really clever way of, I don't know, sort of flipping the art world on its head, because it's very traditional. Everything is very, this is how
Mhm.
it's always been done, so this is how we do it. And I think when works like this happen, it sparks a really interesting conversation of why do we do the things that we do, and why do we display art in the way that we display art, and have we missed a trick? Because well, for first of all, I'd never heard of this artist until you had like pinged her to
Mhm.
me. And she's huge.
Yeah.
She's absolutely huge. She's an absolute superstar. She's a Swiss artist represented by Hauser and Wirth, one of the biggest galleries on the planet. And yeah, I just think, and I've completely missed her in my sort of little pocket of art that I'm
Hmm.
interested in. But she's just it's so interesting how she plays with traditions, not just in how you view art, but also essentially video art, because this is, like you said, this is
Yeah.
1994. I love it. I just think it's so great. Is she in any sort of permanent collections, do you know, that people can perhaps
Oh,
go and see examples?
um, I don't know whether she is, you know. I know I know that she her work does get referenced a fair bit. So
Mm.
Beyonce's video for Lemonade is kind of like a homage to one of her pieces.
Oh.
So basically the protagonist, so the people that are in her work, but also Beyonce in the video is basically walking down a path and just smashing up cars as they're walking along, but it looks very angelic. So
Hmm.
like she does get referenced quite a bit. I know that she's also got a film, which I think I've not seen it myself. It's on my to watch list. I think it's called like Pepperminta.
Ah, yeah. I'd read a wee bit
Hmm.
about it.
So
Hmm.
that gives a really good idea about like her world that she's building and the visuals that she does from the small trailer that I have seen. So I think that's a really good way to kind of get into her way of thinking, because once you're kind of thinking the way that she's thinking, it gets really playful. But in terms of any pieces that are in any permanent collections, there's none that I'm aware of, but I'm certain there will be, just because her work has spanned so many decades and informed so much of like popular culture.
Well, yeah, that's it. And actually, so something interesting that I found is obviously everyone's heard of Google, but also they have this sort of subcategory umbrella company called Google Arts and Culture for people that are listening that maybe haven't heard it. And they've developed this app where you can view this piece in relation to the size of you. So it's an augmented reality thing. So if we'll go on, I can leave a link to it in the show notes below. So essentially, you download this app either for any sort of phone that you
Hmm.
have, and it sort of places the artwork in view with you. So if you're sort of standing looking at the floor, it will show you next to your
Oh
shoe
wow.
what the size of what this video artwork is. So I think that's another way of, you know, making it sort of accessible. And yeah, it's just so interesting how technology, you know, something that was created in 1994, that it's advanced so much that now it's in this app that you can view from wherever you are on the beach. I mean, who's on the beach at the moment, but so
That
interesting.
is mad. That you know, I mean, of course there is an augmented reality that where you can see the size of it to your shoe and what have you. But I guess it still can't take away from actually being there. Unless you were to wear a VR headset and be completely
Mm,
immersed, you know, you wouldn't necessarily be able to fully appreciate it, because on a screen you just get completely distracted by everything that's going on around
yeah.
you.
Well, I think it's the age-old thing, you know, that I mean, you work in the art world as well. You're an artist.
Mm.
Like, you always encourage someone, if you can go and see these things, go and see them, because that you really do lose something when it's represented on a screen or in a book. And yeah, there's ways of experiencing things in real life. But I think that kind of really nicely brings us on to the second thing that you brought to my attention, which was very sort of different and very sort of 2020-esque technology at its best, sort of rewriting how people can interact, or sort of rewriting the narrative really of how we expose people to art and art history and potentially don't call it that. And it's this incredible Van Gogh experience. So do you want to tell us a little bit about this and how this came to your attention?
Yeah, so it's a Van Gogh experience. There are two places in the UK that are doing it at the moment. One's York and one's Liverpool. And the idea is a space, I think in the York experience, it's the Minster, or a large church, which is transformed before your eyes in VR live projections, just transformed into basically Van Gogh paintings. It basically leads you through a narrative with Van Gogh, and I just think it's absolutely fascinating. You know, I think it's such a fantastic way to revive something that a lot of people may have, you know, put to one side as one of the old masters, well, not the masters, One of the people that you should know about, you know that he chopped off his ear, you've seen the paintings of Starry Sky, and you're familiar, but you distance from it because it's not a modern artist. So to bring that into to life and in front of you, I just find it really fascinating the ways that they're reviving all these artists through these forms.
Yeah, well, that's it. And for me, I had seen something similar to this. And so when you sent me the link initially, I was like, oh, I know what this is. This is the one that's in
Mhm,
Paris. And when I clicked and I was like, what? This is in the UK.
mhm.
This is amazing. So I'm absolutely chomping at the bit to get up to York whenever I can to see this. I love it. I think this is just exactly what you said. It's a really clever way of using technology and a way of, I think, introducing people to artists in a space where and in an environment that they feel more comfortable in. Because I sometimes feel like going into a gallery can be very intimidating, and you have these big white walls, these big, vast, empty rooms. But here, you're completely enveloped by the painting. You're essentially stepping into it.
Exactly that. You're a part of that story, you're a part of that event, you're as much as part of it as the projections are, and I think that's really great. It really reminds me of the work that some artists have put on as part of Light Night in Leeds. I know that there are other events across the country that are similar, where they invite artists to put together something for one night or two nights throughout the city, and there is quite a lot of like projection mapping or audience participation. And I think this idea of participation is bleeding into art a lot more now, to try and get people involved and more engaged with the arts. And I think it's just a great way to, take kids along to go see the York Van Gogh experience. And, that could then spark on, further inspiration for the kids. And I just think I think it's fantastic.
It is, and it's genius. And I just think whoever came up with this idea of sort of merging, this great painter to, I don't know, to sort of reimagine it in some way. And it just kind of shows you that, sort of really reiterates for me anyway, that, as an art historian, regardless of how many times you've looked at something, you can always look at it and then approach it in a different way. And I think that's exactly what this experience does. And it's not crazy expensive. And more importantly, what I love about it is that it's not happening in London.
You're not wrong. Yeah, the North needs to have stuff like this to remind people that there is things going on in the North. It's not just London centric.
Well, that's it. And I think, and this is a touring exhibition, so hopefully it will come to more
Mhm,
places. But I just think it's so important that people grow up and are able to get to things like this, and they don't have to make a. So, for example, I grew up in a small town just outside of Glasgow in
mhm.
Scotland, and we have a heritage centre. So it's a coal and steel town. So our heyday is long since gone. And yes, okay, we have exhibitions in Glasgow and in Edinburgh, but really all the big exhibitions that happen in the UK happen in London. And I feel it adds to this whole elitist aspect of engaging with art, and that you have to be in the capital to even be privileged enough to access these things.
100%. Yeah.
And what I love about something like this is that it's projectors, and it can be packed up into a car and it can essentially be shown anywhere. And I love that idea, and getting more people excited about not just this artist, but like you said, you can go away, you can read about these
Mhm.
things, and you just don't know where that's going to take you. It might even inspire you to get, the paints and the pens out yourself. And what a brilliant way to experience art.
Yeah. I think that having this kind of experience, especially outside of London, it'll definitely spark people's creative juices, I'm sure. And they'll want to learn more. I studied in Reading, so I was very lucky to have London on my doorstep. To be able to visit lots of exhibitions because it's only half an hour away. Whereas I've really struggled in the north to be able to have access to the type of exhibitions that I was exposed to. in London.
Mm.
So, I've as an artist, I've found that hard. But imagine, not being an artist, being someone that, just wanting to check something out. And I think a lot of the larger museums up north, going back to what you said about being from heritage towns, coal mining, there's a lot of towns around the area that industry is just no longer there. So a lot of them are looking at art from a point of view, well, it doesn't do art for me because they've not been exposed to it, because they're not really being given, I guess, the privilege of seeing what art can do for a space, an area, or anything like that. So yeah, it's really good to see these kind of experiences like bleeding into up here. I'm just hoping that there will be more in the near future.
Well, that's it. And what I love as well is one of the taglines for this exhibition is "No one is left untouched," and that it kind of emphasize what you're saying there. It doesn't matter where you're from, what your background is. If you did grow up in a
Mhm.
heritage town or even in the middle of the countryside and nowhere, this can still touch you in some way, and it can be a completely personal experience to everybody that walks in. I mean, you and I could
Mhm.
visit this together, and I could leave crying and you could leave being like, "Oh my gosh, I feel really
Yeah.
inspired to do something." And it's such a clever way of how technology and art can come together. And I'm speaking from someone so I work for an art
Mhm.
gallery in London, and I've really seen a resistance in the art world to how technology can be implemented to, I don't know, expose more people to it and not use it as this tool to sell. It's such an important education tool, and that's exactly what something like this is. It sort of revolutionizes the
Oh
teaching of
yeah.
art history, and I think it's incredible. I mentioned very briefly at the start, so of course this one, the Van Gogh one that we're speaking about is in York. But although, like we said, it's touring, so it's probably going
Yeah.
to be moving around. There is something similar in Paris, and anyone that's watched Emily in Paris during lockdown, there's a scene in Emily in Paris where they visit this, and it's called the Workshop of Light. So Altair de Luminaries. Sorry, that my French is appalling. It's even worse when I say that my brother-in-law is French. So if you're listening, I'm terribly sorry for the pronunciation. Those classes have been money well spent, not. But yeah, so they started in this is an old foundry, so an
Mhm.
old bronze foundry, which was abandoned, and it's on the outskirts of the city. And essentially, since
Mhm.
2018, they have 3 exhibitions a year where it's these immersive experiences where you go and you become completely enveloped and become part of an artist's training and work. It's really amazing. So they've just had a Vincent van Gogh one, and they're now sort of moving on to a
Oh
Salvador
wow.
Dali and a Gaudi, who is an architect, and you'll know him from sort of his incredible buildings in Barcelona and all over the place. But I'll leave a link to that in the show notes below, because even just the snippet of, well, here's the sort of teaser of both exhibitions are mind blowing, what they're doing with these spaces and how you can interact with them. And what I love about it is they're also not disgustingly expensive to get to. They're maybe like 11, £12, but it's going to be money that you'll spend, and it's an experience, and it's something that I think we've had enough of staying inside after COVID. So we're all looking for these amazing new experiences. What a great way to meet your friends, and what a great thing to do with your family or a bunch of people is
Mhm.
go and experience these artists. And even if you don't particularly like somebody like Dali or Gaudi or Van Gogh, I would still encourage you to go and experience this and what the potential future of the art world
Completely. and
looks like.
and like you say, the price point is quite accessible for what you're getting out of it as well. You especially in London, you can expect to pay like 25 quid to go to an exhibition, sometimes more.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's, like you say, it comes off as elitist, and it's exclusionary to those that maybe can't afford, to pay that price point. Whereas something like this, which is an inclusive experience, it's a shared experience that you could have, like you say, with your friends and the wider public at that time. It could spark a conversation, a
Mm.
moment with that community that at that time in that space. And I think that's something that you can't necessarily put a price on, but the barrier is more or less always the price.
But it's the potential that's so exciting, and like I couldn't wait to talk to you, Lauren, because I was like, oh, I've got so many things to say on these, and it's really really exciting. And as someone who I'm from an art background, I am in no way sort of tech savvy minded. I'm delighted when I can get an app to work. Genuinely, I'm delighted. So for me, and being able to access something like this, it's going to be amazing. And as the technology gets better, these experiences are only going to
Mhm.
get better and better and better. But there's an artist that you've introduced. So there's two artists that you've introduced me to today, and going on the idea of using technology as a way of not only experiencing art but interacting with art and creating something that you remember and is personal to you. You've introduced me to this incredible artist,
Yeah,
Chris
Chris
Milk.
Milk is been on my radar a little while now, but he's definitely one to watch. Works a lot with technology. I first saw his piece at an exhibition at the Barbican, which was about technology and art basically, and there was some absolutely stunning pieces in the whole exhibition. So I went twice. It's the first exhibition I've actually gone twice to because I needed to take my partner to it. It's like you've got to see that you've just got to be a part of it. Can't explain it.
I love when an exhibition does that. I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah, it was one of those things, and a lot of the pieces still stick with me today. But this one is called The Treachery of Sanctuary, and he sets up three large screens where you're invited as the viewer, and only one at a time as well. So whilst other people might be watching, you're the only one interacting with the screens, and your movement is reflected in the life cycle of a bird throughout it, and you move across it, and the more you flail your arms, you can see it's responding to it, and it's it's really stunning because you feel your impact on that piece, and that piece wouldn't exist without you being there as well. So it's reliant on that viewer artwork relationship, which I think is really beautiful as well.
Yeah, and there's a really brilliant video on Chris's website about the piece, and I'll leave a link to that in the show notes below. But what I love about it is that they film an audience interacting with it, and Chris himself is like, what he gets the most joy of is like seeing people interact with it, and he's like, what a great thing for like a kid on his dad's shoulders to go and experience together. And I just think there's this real sense of he's kind of creating like a community around this piece, even if it's just for the 15,
Mm-hmm.
20 minutes that you're interacting with it. But it's something that will stay with you forever when you leave that space. It's incredible, this sort of life cycle that you go through. And yeah, I just think he's incredible. But again, when was this exhibition at the Barbican? Maybe I should like to you more often. You seem to be so on the ball with what's happening in London, and I
No,
live
this
there.
was 2014, so a little while ago now. So it was
Right.
called Digital Revolutions, and it just explores all the technology advances, what was happening at that time, like going back to like 1970, 80, like what could we do then that we can't do now, or what are we pushing the boundaries on at the moment. And there's a lot of not just Chris's piece, but there was a lot of participation pieces, which I think was another thing that kind of opened my mind is, the need for an audience to create a moment. I think that's like, as an artist, got my mind thinking and about creating those shared experiences. There was one as well. I can't remember the artist. I think it was one of the commissions that they had. It was basically a game where you positioned lasers. Like you had to follow certain shapes around, but you had like 30 other people doing it at the same time. So you like trying to avoid bumping into them whilst maneuvering these lasers within the space. Again, it's one of those things that you walk away from as an experience, and it doesn't matter whether you're dissecting it from a critical point of view or not. Being able to walk away and go, I had fun, I think is a phrase that a lot of people don't associate with art. And yeah, and I think
100%.
that there needs to be some sort of change. Art should be fun. It should be critical. You should be able to think about it, but you should be able to see the playfulness. And it's not about standing in front of a painting and going and stroking your chin and going, yeah, that's good. That's objectively good. It's not about that. It's about like getting involved and losing yourself, but losing yourself in a different way to how you would in just a white cube, you know, kind of, oh, I've lost track of time. More of like losing yourself and losing that, I guess, preconceived idea of how you should enjoy art or look at art. It's just letting go.
How to behave in a
Uh-huh.
space where you view
Yeah.
art.
I was just
Oh,
thinking about another
on you go.
exhibition that I managed to go to in the same year, actually, in 2014. I was visiting Paris, and at Palais de Tokyo, they had this exhibition called Inside. It was transformative for me. I spent 3-4 hours in that space, and it was just people's different concepts of being inside. Obviously, it's kind of a bit meta because you're inside the gallery, but all the artists' interpretations were so different. I spent 20 minutes going through a sellotape tube that someone had created, just having fun in like, it was like a kid's play area, but someone had constructed it completely out of sellotape. It's things like that you just kind of immerse yourself in. There was another piece which was Welsh miners singing in Welsh on the slag heap, and they were talking about going down into the mines, and then you had all the lights that were, what's the word, the kind of like giving the reflective idea that you were actually traveling down into the mines. And it was just all these really interesting concepts, all personal, because obviously it's just one word, but that's how the artist has interpreted the same word and how it means to be inside. Another one, it was raining in a house, so they'd flipped that on its head. It was very bizarre, but very, very fun.
Art should be fun, and talking about it should be fun, and having sort of conversations, like you said, that there is a space and a time for critical thinking and review of things. But I also think even in a gallery space, and I'm just speaking from my personal experience, when people enter the sculpture gallery that I work for example, they
Yes.
instantly start to whisper to each other. And there's been times I'm like, don't worry about it, you can have a full-blown
Hmm.
conversation. Or if someone's phone goes, they step out of the space because they
Yes.
feel that's not how they should behave. And I'm just sort of like, where did someone write this down?
Hmm.
That you can't talk in a gallery space, you can't talk to me who's on the desk. I'm If you ever come into Pangolin London
Hmm.
and in King's Cross, talk to me, because like that's part of my job as well. Like I want you to enjoy the pieces and understand, talk to the people that are in these spaces. One of my favorite things to do is to go to the National
Hmm.
Gallery in London. Again, that's free to go in, and I talk to the security guards because they are in these rooms all day, every day. These guys know their stuff. It's amazing. Have conversations with people, interact, have fun. And I think something like Chris's piece does that. It just gives you this sense of fun. Another artist that I've experienced that with is Oliver Ellison. So he had a huge retrospective at the Tate in 2019, just before the world fell apart, and he had loads of these things that you had to interact with the art pieces. And there was this one where it was essentially just this huge long corridor that he pumped full of smoke and colored light, and you had to just make your way from one end to the other. Now that sounds
Yeah.
naff when you explain it out loud, but when I say that the smoke and the fog is so thick that you can't really see your hand in front of your face, and it's this sense of displacement and where your mind goes. And for one person, and then next to me there'd be this child running through it killing themselves laughing because they thought it was hilarious. And that's also, and then it changed my view of the experience, because I was
Hmm.
like, when do you ever feel so displaced in a controlled environment? It's so clever how you can use things like that and use technology, which I think brings us on to a really important point that you've brought up when we were sort of chatting before we started recording. Is of course, with everything that's happened with COVID, and the world has been
Hmm.
completely catapulted online. And is this now a time for museums and galleries to sort of embrace the digital and think about how they can interact with it differently? I mean, what's been your experience as you know, as a maker, as a creative, and seeing the world and how
It's
the art world has
I gotta say
responded?
it's been quite difficult. Like I say, a lot of my work is dependent on an audience in a space. So that's been really difficult to kind of transfer online. In terms of experiencing art myself, I've struggled as well, but I've found that I've used the time to kind of, I guess, think more critically about the pieces. Whereas in terms of accessibility, it's probably one of the hardest times that a lot of people will be having to kind of feel connected with the art world. I know you can do virtual exhibitions in some spaces,
Mm.
or where you're physically moving, like the Google Arts and Culture, like you would on Google Maps. But that to me is a little bit weird, just because it's it's
Yeah.
voyeuristic in a really, I find, kind of perverse way, but also like it's quite stagnant. It's like, oh, look at this one, let's move on. Look at this one, let's move on. And a lot of other
Mm.
exhibitions as well, they might do virtual exhibitions where there's a space that looks like a gallery, and then you just press an arrow and it switches the picture. um, that I find more distracting than the looking at the piece, this false environment. And again, it goes back to you mentioning about going into a gallery and someone's phone rings and they go out the space, or they whisper, and it's just like it's this perceived way that people should be viewing it. You should be sat down, and I think that's weird that that's translated into the virtual world when that's completely the opposite of what you might be doing at that time. For me, I'm distracted
Mm.
like pretty much 90% of the day. So to get me to sit in front of a screen to try and, be captivated by something is hard. And it's harder still, if you've got all these, I don't know, like I say, it's just this idea, oh, there's a white bench in front of this frame that where the artwork will be. It's like, well, maybe I wanted to sit right in front of the piece and see how close I could see those paintbrush strokes. And maybe I wanted to stand at far back at the room and just actually people watch. And you can't get that digitally. You can't get that digitally at all.
Mm.
And I think that's where it struggles. I know a lot of museums have done like talks, where they've had someone critically explain a piece, and try and engage an audience that way. And I think that is a useful way to try and engage people in the art world, but it doesn't necessarily connect as much. It's like when you're watching something on, I don't know, on YouTube, and the ads come up and you're like, "Ah, go away, ads, go away." Like I just want to see what I wanted to see. And I think having those distractions
Mm.
just, I don't know, it doesn't really work for me. There's too many screens going on in my life at the moment, and they all mean the same. Whereas if you go to a gallery, you're completely involved in what you're seeing, and you can lose yourself that way. It's not happening with a screen.
Yeah, it's so funny because I'm sort of sitting on the fence here because I completely agree with you with the whole idea of, and I'd never thought of it before, that idea of how you're supposed to behave, be quiet, take, if you get a phone call, leave. It's that very sort of quiet, reflective space. And you're completely right that that has been, for a lot of places,
Hmm.
translated online, and you have to sort of move through it in a very sort of methodical way. And I'm a bit like you, when I enter a space, if a painting catches my eye but it's got number
Yeah.
7 written on it, I don't care. Like I'm straight for number 7. And I don't know, it's so interesting. But I think for me, so when we're thinking about the idea that it's very stagnant and you have to move through it this very rigid way, if you will, I think I get excited about the concept of how far we can take it. And this is just the beginning of it. And we've only really scratched the surface of what we can do with it. Because you have to remember, big institutions, they're run by people who
Hmm.
are very resistant to change. So the fact that they're even thinking about doing live videos and talks through a gallery, my question to them is, why has that not always been the case? Because, for example, speaking from my experience, so in October, just before we went back into the second lockdown,
Hmm.
we realized in our space, because I work for a commercial gallery, that we couldn't have a private view in the same way that we have a private view normally. We couldn't have the same amount of people in the space. So we had to pivot. And what we decided to do was live stream the private view that was happening in the gallery, but between the artist and my director. And what we did was we walked round, and the artist then, because we're sculpture, could then interact with the piece
Oh,
and pick it
okay.
up and turn it around and show people. And it was a different way, but my job was essentially to sort of answer questions on Instagram Live and on YouTube as the talk was happening. And we had people in like Canada, America. So, and that for me struck the question of, it's another way of making it inclusive for people that perhaps can't afford a
Hmm.
flight or can't afford to get on a train to come to these places. But I think, oh yeah, you're so right. I had never really thought of it in that it comes across quite stagnant. I think for me, I'm just delighted that I can interact with art in some way. But of course, it never takes away, like we said right at the start of this, it never takes away from seeing something in real life. I remember the first time that struck me was when I was a student, and there was an incredible impressionist exhibition at the National Gallery in Edinburgh. And I went along, and it was, so there's these great big pillars that are in front of the door, and they'd stuck all these huge big plastic daisies on them. And I thought, because it was the whole exhibition was to do with how
Hmm.
impressionists had responded to the theme of gardens. And there was this incredible Van Gogh painting, funnily enough, back to Van Gogh. And I, it's the first time I'd seen
Hmm.
one, like an actual one, a real one in front of me. And I felt like I could have fallen into it, because the energy and how he applied the paint, the brush strokes, how vivid it was. And I was in front of this painting for maybe a good 10, 15 minutes, because every part of it just moved me in
Yeah.
some way. And I was like, I'm buying the exhibition catalogue. And I went into the shop at the end, and I picked up the exhibition catalogue, and I flipped straight to that painting to check it was in there. And
Mm.
and it was just so flat and lifeless. And it made me so upset. And I was like, oh my God, of course, how can you replicate
Hmm.
something on a
I mean, you can
page
talk about it.
or on a
Obviously,
screen?
you can say, "Oh,
Um,
well, this bit's raised, this bit's deeper, this bit's darker," and you can analyze it to the nth degree. But like you say, just actually being there and it making an impression on you, is something that you can't really do in a book. And you can try on screen. A lot of I've seen a few videos where they've done like 3D painting, so with VR, and they've moved around, and I think that's really cool, really, really cool, really interesting, and um, a really great way, another great way of using technology. But it's not necessarily um, it's not necessarily the same. So I guess really it's more about like not necessarily a virtual exhibition, but like the next phase of like virtual art, maybe just the way that that's going to change. Because that's going to have to adapt, isn't it? If
mm.
we're spending a lot more time virtually, then that's going to have to adapt to have our like keep us interested, I guess, and be current, but and also be reflective of this time. It's going to be interesting to see how much works talk about this time of where art has been a little bit strangled because of COVID and lockdowns and what have you. Is that going to be represented in any way through any of the next pieces of art, and are they going to reflect how art has been viewed?
Well, that's it. And even how art has been made, like you said, if you think of, like everything, art has to move with the times. If I think of someone like David Hockney, for example, who in
Yeah,
2010, I think it was, did a whole series of iPad drawings.
they
And the
weren't a
art
fan, were
world was
they?
like, that's disgusting. What are you doing? And no, oh my gosh, especially The Guardian. Funnily enough, I've got an episode coming out in a few weeks. By the time this goes out, it will be out. and the lovely girl that I'm speaking to, Hannah, who's an artist and loves Hockney, we chat about the hatred of them when they first came out, but actually it's a great way of
Hmm.
breaking down the sort of the traditional elitism that surrounds art. You know, people love this bohemian idea of like an artist at their easel or an artist standing in front of a huge big block of marble, like chipping away at a sculpture. And the art
Yeah.
world and how art is made, one has never been that. And it is you have to move with the time. So it's great when you have all these amazing things like Chris Milk and you know, Pippi Lottie and even this Van Gogh experience. It's a way of moving art along with the times, and it's going to be really
Mhm.
exciting to see how people create art using, you know, using technology, using virtual experiences, and how that can hopefully reignite a love of engaging, and also perhaps finally
Mhm.
break down this fear of entering gallery spaces because you don't know how to view something or you don't feel comfortable viewing something in a way. I think
Mhm.
there's so many, you know, particularly the generation that's coming up behind us, they've grown up looking at screens, they're comfortable with screens. So if you put screens in a gallery environment, regardless of what's going on around them, they're going to know how to interact with that and feel really comfortable.
Yeah,
And I think,
absolutely. Where is
where's
where
the
is the
harm in
harm?
that?
Like I guess taking screens out of your home is in terms of virtual experience. Like you say, put it into a gallery space and see how it, see how that adapts with artwork and the times and what have you. I guess the virtual
Mm.
experience would then be obviously art, but like seeing an art piece on your phone in your home seems completely removed. Again, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like obviously the white cube being a space where you're told whatever's in there is art, seeing it on your phone at home, does that take away from it being art? Because it's not, even though it is a piece that would be on a screen in a gallery when they're open, but seeing it on your phone, does that? I don't know. Sorry, just like my mind's just gone to those places.
No, it's so funny because I never got to this exhibition actually, but because I couldn't physically get
Mhm.
tickets for it. But I think it was 2018 or 2019 that the Royal Academy in London um, took a video artist, so his name is Bill Viola, and placed his work side by side with Michelangelo. And it was a really interesting contrast
Mhm.
between how they were both so powerful, but in their own way and have and of their own time. I mean, this is a huge big question that I don't think we're gonna figure out in this sort of hour-long podcast, but it's a conversation I would love listeners to keep having and to think about. And yeah, it's just I think it's quite exciting actually to see how we can use technology to encourage more people to engage with the arts,
Mhm.
to be make it more accessible and to experiment and make it more fun. And yeah, I think
100%, yeah, definitely.
it's really just the
Seeing
beginning.
technology and video just kind of evolve into what it is now, it is very exciting to see, where it could find itself, even in like 5 years' time. I think it's a um, very exciting moment.
Lauren, thank you so much. I feel like I could talk to you for about 5.5 hours about this, but you've given me more than enough of your
Hmm.
time. So before I go, I do have one final question. It's quite a big question, and it is the Joe's Art History podcast. So you can take this question sort of as wide or as personal to you. But my question is,
Is a
why
big
is art
question.
important?
I think art is important because it's an expression, it's reflective of yourself, but also the world that you're living in, and it's an outlet, which I think now more than ever is so important to be able to be emotionally to be able to emotionally release something, even if it's mark making or anything like that. Art is so important to being able to communicate feelings and moments, and I think that's why it's important.
I love asking people that question, and especially when everyone goes, "Oh," and they always have like a good 10 seconds of, "Yep, big question, thank you." But I don't warn anyone about it. So, but amazing, amazing answer. I love asking that question. So finally, before you go, Lauren, where can people
I've
find
got a few
you and
places.
connect with
So
you
I've
and
got a website
engage?
which shows a fair bit of my creative work, which is www.justlaurenharrison.com. So that's JUSTLAURENHARRISON. And I also have Instagram. I've got one where I'm just pottering about, which is at brews underscore and underscore chats. So brews is in your cup of tea and chats. And I also have more of my work in progress for my artistic practice, which is at Kath underscore E underscore ode. So CATH underscore E underscore ODE.
Amazing. And I will leave links to all of that in the show notes below. And yes, people, if you've enjoyed this chat, please get in touch with Lauren and follow her on her socials. And yeah, see what she's up to and creating, because you will be back out in the world once it decides to fix itself, making and creating. And definitely next time I'm in Leeds, we have to meet for a coffee and a drink, because this is just, I'm loving this chat so much. And there you have it, another episode of the Jo's Art History podcast. Once again, thank you so much to Lauren. This was such an interesting chat. It's got me thinking about loads of things, particularly for my own interests, where the art world can go with the digital, the possibilities, how we can use this incredible tool to make art more accessible, more enjoyable, and just more encouraging, really, for people to sort of get out and up into galleries. It's really, really important that all institutions, not just, new contemporary galleries who are at the forefront of all these new waves of improvements, embrace them. It has to be embraced by everybody, and it has the potential to be incredible. And I'm really excited to see what happens with this. If you've enjoyed this chat, please feel free to let us know. You can contact me, joesarthistory@gmail.com, or you can DM me on Instagram at joesarthistory. And hey, while you're DMing me, why not give me a wee follow? That would be brilliant. As always, all the images that we've discussed can be viewed via my Instagram, so at Jo's Art History once again, and you can also find them on my website. However, I might stop uploading them to the website because I've had a look at the analytics and really only about 3 people do that. So if that's something that you don't want me to stop doing, please do get in touch and let me know. This podcast can also be viewed via YouTube as well, and you can listen along with subtitles, as it's very important for me that this podcast is inclusive, and not listening via a phone or on your television is the best way for everyone to enjoy podcasts, and I completely understand that. If I can improve the videos in any way on YouTube, please also get in touch and let me know. Feedback is always welcome. Further to that, if you have any suggestions for any topics that you would like to hear on the podcast, please feel free to get in touch. I would love to hear from you. If you're able to, on the device that you're listening on, it would mean the world to me if you could leave me a review, if you were able to, on whatever platform you're listening to this. I don't think you can leave reviews on Spotify, so Spotify listeners, you're off the hook. However, iTunes people, please leave me a wee review. It helps move me up the charts, and it helps other listeners find us as well. Finally, I have been your host and resident art historian, Jo McLaughlin, as always. And thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to welcoming you next time on the Jo's Art History podcast. Until then, keep learning, and remember, art is for all. I'm off to go book tickets to this Vincent van Gogh thing. Bye!